So as a child, very young, I had some wild and crazy experiences. My family was homeless all the time. So my mother, she would take us all around the country. We lived in 23 states and probably 50, 60 different cities throughout each of these states by the time I was 6, right? But we would always go back to this little town called Carlisle, Kentucky, where it was sort of a time capsule of the 1940s that still existed in 1990. And it was completely segregated. There were places where Black people couldn't eat. There were places where Black people couldn't go. There was an entire section of town called Henryville where Black people lived. White people had the rest of the place. And it was very common to just find yourself being called a nigger on any day of the week. You couldn't walk down the street as a family without someone screaming nigger out their car window. So that was sort of the setting of my childhood. From there, we moved to the fact that because of the homelessness and my mother's mental illness, we ended up being removed from state's custody. And in the situation where the police came to remove us from her custody, she was holding me and they were ushering my siblings into the state vehicle, and the police ripped me from her arms. And it was like a slow motion scene from some drama. When she tried to break through and get back to her children, the last thing that we saw of our mother for a very long time was the police beating her to the ground with batons until she couldn't move. So we fast forward to me being in state's custody. Before I entered first grade, I sort of tested for my IQ, and I was found to be gifted. They wanted to skip me from first grade to ninth grade. I tested at a 10th grade level on most of my academics. This was problematic because I was placed in a foster home in a town called Cynthiana that was predominantly white, very few Black people. And in school, I just, as a matter of fact, happened to outperform all the other white kids in every single facet of academics and athletics. And the white parents didn't like this very much. So I wasn't made privy to the reasons behind this until I was much older. But it turned out that I was taken out of my normal courses and placed in special ed because people knew no one was going to fight for me. I was a Black kid in Cynthiana with no parents. This is just an orphan kid who everybody knew was invisible. And they literally made me invisible. They took me out of my normal courses, placed me in a special ed class where we just did paint by color. We watched videos, Land Before Time, and we did puzzles. And it wasn't for several years, well, not several, but a couple of years after, that it was discovered that I was gifted again because a teacher found me reading Dickens in my free time on lunch. And he thought it was cute. He was like, oh, look at this little special kid. Does it have pictures? And I started conversing with him about the plot of A Tale of Two Cities. And he was just flabbergasted. What is this kid doing in special ed? And finally, that was rectified later down the road. But it was never rectified fully, despite the fact that I had this IQ following me around, that it was only used to ever reprimand me, to tell me I was smarter. But no one ever paid attention to my education. I never actually received an education. And that could be a conversation for another time. Mm-hmm. So they completely derailed my opportunity for education. And it was largely based on racial sort of misgivings. So we moved further down the road in my experience, and we bounced around several different homes for several different years. And finally, we found a white woman in Berea, Kentucky, who was wanting to adopt me and my two brothers, not our older sister, but just me and my two brothers. And she goes through the entire process, and her ex-husband finds out that she's going to adopt us. And evidently, he's a racist man. So he says that he vows to kill any nigger found sleeping underneath of the roof of the house that he paid for. So that completely takes that, permanency off of the table for all of us. And we just got lost in the system, basically. After that, I ended up, depending on how you count it, 45 different homes in 12 years. Let's see. This is just the highlight reel. There's so much more. But by the time I became a teenager, my social worker had decided that I was being corrupted by Black culture. She unilaterally just decided that this was my issue, that I was being corrupted by Black culture. And so she proceeded to take it upon herself to, from then on, only place me in sundown towns, and towns where I was either the only Black person or one of the only Black people. So if you're not familiar with the term sundown town, a lot of people outside of Appalachia probably aren't. It's what we call these towns where they're predominantly white, and they're tolerant of people of color coming in to buy things and do business, but they say, don't be here when the sun sets, right? You're not allowed to live here. You can come through, you can eat, you can spend your money here. Don't be here when the sun goes down. So that's where they get this moniker, Sundown Town. The bulk of my really nasty experiences with racism come in the context of my experiences as a teenager in this sundown town known as Jackson County, where there's literally a plywood sign underneath the Welcome to Jackson County sign that says, "The sun don't set on niggers in Jackson County." So this is the first thing that I see upon entering my new home.
What year is this when you enter?
Is the year 2000.
Okay.
This is the year 2000. So I was 15. So in this town, with this sign and this attitude, the first thing that happens is I get placed in public school, and the whole town is made aware that there's a black guy living in the town now. And I was a very, muscular, large for my age type of a guy. I looked like I could have been, probably a 20-something-year-old guy. So the boys' home that I was placed in, it was called the Barnabas Home or the Anvil Institute. They immediately had to put bulletproof windows in the entire dormitory because they were receiving so many threats for people to kill me by shooting me through the windows. So that was my introduction into Jackson County. There were a lot more things than that, but I'm just trying to keep this brief. I'm not going to even get into the sort of school life that I had to go through, being the only black person in the school and having a predominantly racist peer group. But I had to fight a lot in the bathrooms. I would try to use the bathroom, and they would just chant, "I smell a nigger," outside of the bathroom stall while I was, and I'd have to come out and stand my ground and fist fight a couple of angry rednecks. So this continued, and at some point, I do want to say this ended up being one of my most cherished experiences in life because I took it upon myself to become an ambassador for black people. I realized that these were people who had never had an encounter with black people, and that I was going to decide for all of them what they really thought from their experiences with black people. And I actually, for the people who were in my age group, by the time I left that town, all of them were much more tolerant of black people. I became a very prominent person in the school, sports, cheerleading, everything, academics. And I was able to do some really cherished things with the peer group that I found myself in, where they no longer held the same sort of racism that they held when I arrived, right? I was able to sort of change hearts and minds by being an example of how their stereotypes could clash with the reality that I wasn't that person. I was, I was completely different from what they had sort of been raised to believe. Could you, if you remember, could you explain, like, how did you get that idea to take that tact? What was the reasoning, or was there something that you saw outside of you that gave you a clue of how to do that? So I've been, as I'm attesting to right now, I've been dealing with racism my entire life. And I realized that I really was acting out their stereotypes. So at that point in my life, I was an angry little shit, and I was sort of misanthrope and just living up to every stereotype, angry, saggy pants, and just all of the nines that sort of reifies in their mind that they're right immediately about what I must be. So I took it upon myself to really ask myself, is it really worth having to fight every day? Is it really worth having to be completely socially isolated? Or is there some way that I can approach this to where I can navigate this social dynamic in a way where everybody benefits? And so I just started experimenting, and I was very successful in a lot of different ventures. Man, I don't want to hijack this, and I know this is not why we're here. So I don't want to. That's
Adrian. No, we're here just to listen to you and to discover things from you. So
if I can just do a tangential story. So there was a situation. I was in a history class, and I had this. Everybody had to group up with another classmate, and the last classmate who got stuck with me, he just picks up his desk, carries it across the room, and refuses to interact with me. So for the rest of the semester, we have this semester project that we're supposed to do, and we go about doing this. He does his own thing. Everybody else works in groups. I do my own thing. So at the end of the semester, I get an A on everything, just top of the class, and he's got D or a C or something. So when we come back from Christmas break, he picks up his desk, carries it back over, and sits next to me. And this is something that a lot of black people are going to really not be able to understand. But he sits there and just starts staring at me and goes, "You know what? You ain't dumber and shit like I thought you'd be." And I looked at him, and my first reaction was, I'm going to hit this bitch in the mouth. I'm sorry. I'm going to hit this guy in the mouth. And he says, "You know what? You don't smell like shit like my mommy and daddy said you would either." And he said, "As a matter of fact, you're smarter than I am. You got higher grades on me than everything. And so this guy, I can't remember I know his last name was Ingram, but I can't remember his first name. But he was sort of my inroads to the sort of diplomacy with the rest of the school, because he was sort of a good old boy, and he was in the Ag Society. And so he starts vouching for me, that, hold on, just give this guy a chance. He's a pretty decent fella, and he's smart and funny. And so he sort of got me accepted into the social dynamic in a way that nothing else did. But had I reacted in that moment to his ignorance, because he was actually trying to build a bridge, it was just his social conditioning and his preconceived notions and just his lack of experience with black people, that everything that he was saying to me was just offensive as hell, But I had the presence of mind in that moment to just sit back and see where it went. And it turned out that he was trying to extend the olive branch and create some sort of a dialogue. And my sensitivity to that moment, it ended up paying huge dividends. Anyway, so yeah, that was the sort of experiences that I had with racism, and sort of overcoming those differences inform a lot of my positions today about the need for dialogue and the need to sort of suspend these knee-jerk reactions and educate and exchange, and you know what I mean? But I know it's hard. I know that can be hard for people. So getting on with my highlight reel, this is where it gets a little bit nasty. So at some point, I had done such a good job assuaging this racial tension that existed in the school, that the group home that I was in decided that it was safe for other black people to come. So they bring another black guy from Louisville. His name was Charles Wellington, I think. And he starts attending the public school, and everything's going well. And so one day we have to do work on Saturdays for the group home. They would use us as free labor for the community to chop wood, and they would make money off of it, foster care. And we get done with our chores for the Saturday, so they take us to lunch at a diner in a small town called Tyner, at a sit-go gas station. And we didn't get off of campus except to go to public school and to do these small little outings. So it was our only opportunity to, do something delinquent. So we buy a pack of cigarettes and we go outside. Me and this giant, by the way, he's a year younger than me. I'm 15, he's 14. But this guy is 6'4" and probably 240 pounds. He looks just like the reincarnation of Biggie Smalls. And so we're standing out in front of this sit-go in Tyner, and we are out there chain smoking Newports for, maybe 20 minutes. And evidently someone either rode by and saw us, or someone made a phone call, because out of nowhere, probably 5 trucks and SUVs and cars just pull up to a screeching halt, and out hop 30 or 40 armed skinheads. They're armed with machetes and chains and baseball bats and rifles and shotguns, and they are making a beeline directly to us. And so a little bit of background, in Jackson County, there's this white power sect, a chapter called the Cornbread Mafia. And they don't like black people. And so to them, what they're seeing is there's just 2 giant black men in front of their sit-go next to their baseball field, just smoking up a pack of Newports without a care in the world. So they descend on us, and I immediately understood what they were seeing. And I grabbed Charles and I opened up the door and I shoved him inside, and I put my back up against the door, and all I could do was say, "Hey, what's up?" And so immediately, don't nod your nigger head at me, motherfucker. What the fuck are you doing in my So they are descending on me. I'm surrounded. I've got machetes to my neck. I've got people aiming guns at my face. And the only thing that stopped me from actually getting lynched in that moment was there was one of the staff who works at the boys' home I was at, who was a very sort of mythological figure in that community, the sort of folk legend status where supposedly he punched a bull and knocked it out or something of this. Yeah. And he's the one who had taken us out to eat lunch. He comes out and he sort of brokers this truce between, and he tells them, these boys are 15, they live at the boys' home. You touch them, you're going to have to go through me, sort of a situation. And the sort of respect that he had in the community, they said, well, just don't have these niggers out here in town anymore. It's going to be a problem. So they load back up and they go away. So after that, it turns into a situation where, in fact, they were true to their word. They made sure to police the town to make sure that the black people were not out and about. And we always suspected that there was someone who was acting as a mole inside of the boys' home, because for summer vacations and Christmas breaks, we would be allowed to leave and go on what was called a pass to see family or friends for the holidays or for vacations or for funerals. Every time that I left the town and I tried to come back, they would have roadblocks set up at both sides of the county line where they were searching everyone's car to see if I was in them. And they had posted signs around the town saying that they were going to gut me if they found me. So this is actually, so we would have to stop and pull a U-turn, go all the way back somewhere, let me out of the vehicle, and I'd have to go and run behind trees in a creek until I got past the roadblock and my staff could pick me up further on down the road. That was a thing that happened for a very long time. And then to put the cherry on top of this racial sundae, I ended up, unbeknownst to myself, getting involved in a romantic relationship with the niece of the leader of this cornbread mafia. And this is where everything came to. He finds out, and now my assassination has been solicited. Open source, hit put out on me. And they burned across. At this point, I'd moved from the boys' home to a foster home, greatest foster home I ever had. These people are the only foster home I ever went to that treated me like a human being, and actually treated me better than their own kids. But I'd only been there for about 5 months, and they had just dealt with so much, venom from the people in the neighborhood for taking me in. And they ended up burning across in their front yard, catching the yard on fire, and I was whisked away to Louisville, Kentucky overnight. Without any preparation, chances to say goodbye to people, etc.
Okay.
So I'll have to double back for this other one because I really want to put a fine point on the fact that I've dealt with the type of racism that probably hasn't been experienced by most people of color since on this side of the 1970s. You know what I mean? At one point, there was a kid who I was in this boys' home with named Sam Hurd, and his dad had started dating a black woman from Covington, Kentucky. They lived in a town called McCreary County, down by the state line in Tennessee. And they wanted to prove to this lady that it was safe for her to come and live down there with them. So they entreat me to come, having witnessed the success that I had dealing with racial issues in Jackson County. They entreat me to come along for the summer and prove to this woman that if I can be down there and be safe, she can be safe. Now, this is just altogether one of the most extreme experiences that I've ever had. I've never seen anything like this before or since. But me and Sam were great friends. And on the way down, he just keeps telling me about this buddy that he grew up with since diapers, who we're just going to get along. We're going to get on like, pigs and slop, whatever you want to say. He just cannot speak highly enough of this guy. So we get down to Sam's house, and his dad starts loading up the guns, setting up the trail. We're going to go shooting. And in the meantime, Sam says, we're going to go see his buddy. So we hop in his little red convertible, and we're riding across town. It's probably 20, 30 minutes away to his friend's house. And we get to this dirt road, and I see these two elderly white people. And, they've got to be 80 or 90, but they're propping each other up, walking, the cutest thing you've ever seen. And the woman's hunched over to where she's just looking straight at the ground. And we drive by, and we're doing probably like 5 miles an hour because it's a dirt road. We don't want to throw up too much dust. And the woman stands up straight like she's 15 years old and says, "Is that a nigger?" And I immediately knew what we were in for. So just down the road is his friend's house. And he pulls in and hops out of the car, goes up to the front door, knocks on the door. The guy comes out, and they just start, "Oh my God, when the fuck did you get out? Oh, it's good to see you." And they're hugging and trying to catch up. And at one point, his friend looks over and sees me and says, "What the fuck?" and grabs Sam and pulls him into the house. And from the outside, I just hear glass breaking, screaming and yelling. And momentarily, Sam comes running out, hops back in the car, and just starts zooming out of there. And I say, "What's going on?" He says, "He just said if I don't get your black ass off of his property, he's going to shoot you when he gets his gun loaded." And so Sam was completely taken aback. He had known this guy his entire life, but because McCreary County didn't have black people, the conversation about race just never came up. He did not know I was a racist, evidently a murderous racist. So we get back to the house, and we're loading up the guns, and I'm like, "It's no big deal. I've dealt with this before. It's not your fault." And we're just going to let it go by, and we're going to go back, and we're going to go behind the trailer and do some shooting. And by the time we get loaded up, and I've probably got a shotgun and a couple of pistols and a rifle on me, and they're equally armed. And we start to make our way to the trail, and we just hear loud engines just zooming down. So they lived on a one-way entrance, one way in, one way out. And these guys pull in, and it's his best friend with 4 truckloads of guys armed to the teeth, and they do a drive-by shooting on the trailer that he knows we're supposed to be in, because they were harboring me there as a black man, right? And it turned into a shootout, and I won't elaborate much further than that. No one was hurt, well, at least not by bullets, but that is a thing that happened. So after the Jackson County incident and this McCreary County incident, my social worker sees the error in her ways and puts me in Louisville, Kentucky, so I can get away from the sort of racist stuff that I've been dealing with. Now, that's a little bit of my experience with racism, and I just have one thing to sort of speak to, a little bit of my experience with police brutality. So I go directly from this Jackson County incident, and they put me in what's called an independent living home in Louisville. So I'm taken directly from being completely institutionalized for almost 12 years, and then they just throw me in an apartment, tell me I have rent due on the 1st, and expect me to be able to navigate, mainstream social society, having been isolated from that for my entire life at this point. So I resorted to a little bit of crime, and I made a little bit of a reputation for myself as being a ruffian. I could elaborate more, but I won't. And I had a couple of roommates who were in a similar situation to myself. They were all black. And we had another friend named Demetrius who would come around. He was in the program, but he wasn't a roommate of ours. And one day he comes running up the stairs and he says, "These people just called me a nigger. We got to go. We got to go." So we all stand up, and we don't know what's going on. And we run out the front door. And we just run headlong into a street fight where there's 50, 60 people leaving Bardstown Road, which is basically the Vegas Strip of Louisville. At least back then, it was the place where all the bars and everybody went, basically the hopping part of town. Basically, the police get called. It's four black guys fighting 20 different white guys and 30 or more white people onlooking. And the police pull up, and the first thing that they do is handcuff all the black guys and put us on the sidewalk. And so at some point, the boy Demetrius had gone into the house, gotten a meat cleaver, and came out and tried to attack people with it. I personally knocked him out and took the knife and set it down next to a light pole. At some point, someone actually accused me of being the person who had been the person wielding this meat cleaver. And so the police start to try to interrogate me, and I tell them, "I don't know what you're talking about." So this is what they do to me. They take me to the police cruiser. This is enhanced interrogation. They take me to the police cruiser. They take the passenger side seat of the police cruiser, and they push it back as far as it'll go. And then they handcuff me. They take me and turn me upside down to where my wrists are hung up on the back of the seat. They turn me upside down and cram me into the floor space of the back seat of this police cruiser. They roll up the windows and turn on the heat, and it's already 80 degrees. It's summer in Louisville, and they leave me there, and they just keep coming back periodically to roll down the windows and say, "You want to talk now? You want to talk now?" So I'm not going to pretend that the abuse was one-sided. I was very verbally abusive to these police. I said a lot of really foul things to them. There's a larger story around all that might be kind of interesting to some people, but I just want to keep it to where it's focused on my experience with the police brutality. This is where this one gets really nasty. So these same cops, I talked about their moms and told them I was going to do explicit things to their families and whatnot. And at that point in time, I was a regular at a bar on Bardstown Road. I'd gotten in under circumstances where I just sort of it was never questioned whether or not I was of age. And I would frequent this bar a lot of the time. And I'm there one night, a couple of weeks after this incident that I just described. And I'm getting a little bit loaded, but not more than usual. And for some reason, the bouncers come up to me and they tell me I have to leave. And so I go to the front door, and they're like, "Nope, you have to go through the back door. You go through the back door." And I'm guessing the jig is up. They found out that I'm a minor. I'm a 16-year-old kid, and I'm in here getting loaded with a bunch of adults. And they're getting me out of here, and they don't want anybody to see it. So I walk out this back door, loaded to the gills, and waiting in the dark alley behind this bar are 2 of the cops, the ones who had stuffed me in the cruiser like that. And they proceeded to take turns holding me and beating the living hell out of me to teach me a lesson about my mouth. So this is me as a 16-year-old kid, not being approached in any lawful manner, just vigilante justice from start to finish. And so I'm going to end it there. I could continue, but I think that anyone who was questioning the validity of my claim that I've been a victim of extreme racism and extreme police brutality will probably agree by this point that it deserves that modifier, that adjective in front of racism.
How do you go forward from that moment in life and not allow the anger and the amount of violence that you've absorbed control you and consume you?
It's despite all of the experiences that I've had, I've never been someone who thinks on racial terms. I do everything in my power to find better explanations before I jump to assuming racism. But I've done a lot of personal work on myself, and that's a whole nother story. But I see and I believe that these are unfortunate people. Imagine being so unfortunate that your worldview is skewed to the point that you are an adherent to some of the nastiest things that you can believe. These people are, in a way, actually more unfortunate than the people who they attack, because this is your legacy in the world. This is your contribution to the project of human society, and you are doing damage instead of building. And there's this compassion that I can find for these people, having sort of been embedded among them in the ways that I had for so long, that I honestly see the traces back to their parental upbringing and roots, where they're sort of helpless in this scenario, in a way. And even when they become adults, people are like, well, now they should be able to know better. Well, talk to religious people who have a difficulty leaving their religions even after they encounter counterfactual information that should change their mind. But these things, it's indoctrination, and it's a lot harder to escape than a lot of people give credit. And a lot of these people are truly unfortunate to have been convinced of the beliefs that they have. And that's usually the way that I approach these sort of situations. I understand that there's a lot of things that I could have been that would not have necessarily been my fault because of the way I was raised. Fortunately, I avoided a lot of that.
There's an aspect of what's going on